Parents expect me to use my inherited college fund for their wedding, but when I refused, they made me the villain in front of the family. Hey! This is going to be kind of long since I have a lot that I want to talk about. So please just bear with me, thank you so much. I, 17 male, recently inherited a lot of money from my great uncle who passed away last year. I'm going to get access to it only next year, after I turn 18, and until then, his lawyer is going to handle the trust for me. It's a ton of money, but in the will itself, my great uncle had mentioned that it's mainly for my education, but if I have any left after paying off my tuition, I can use it any way I want. And now, my parents are insisting that I use that money to pay for their wedding because they think that there's no way I'll need all of it to cover my tuition. I have refused though, because even if I don't need it for my tuition, it's nice to have some money kept aside for myself for the future. Besides, even apart from my tuition, I'll still have to look out for other expenses, and also, it doesn't really hurt to stay on the safe side and have some savings. I thought that I was being reasonable enough by telling my parents that I did not want to spend money on their wedding, but they were very upset with me and I didn't understand what to do. For context, my parents are getting remarried to each other after being divorced for 5 years. My parents met each other in college and were together back then, and that's when my mom ended up getting pregnant with me. After they graduated, they decided to get married, and judging by my childhood, I can say that the marriage was not a happy one. I don't know how the first couple of years went, but I remember that as I grew up, all I would hear was them complaining about money, or the lack thereof. They would constantly be fighting with each other, and if they were not doing that, they would be pretending that the other one didn't exist at all. My mom was a SOM and she constantly blamed my dad for ruining her life and not letting her have a career because she was stuck at home taking care of me, and my dad would bring up how he was slogging at work day and night just for our family, and in the middle of all of this, I just felt like I was the problem all the time. So I tried my best to make myself feel non-existent to them so they wouldn't end up feeling burdened by me, and they didn't seem to mind that either. I tried my best to keep my grades up and my mouth shut whenever I was at home because I did not want to be a problem for my parents. So yeah, I would say that growing up in my house was a difficult task. And unfortunately, even though I grew up trying not to get in the way of my parents, they still ended up getting divorced when I was around 12 because my mom ended up having an affair. The divorce was pretty bitter and nasty, and my parents kept trying to make me pick sides, but thankfully, my grandparents saved me from going through all the drama at the time. After my dad found out about her affair, I don't know the details, but I know that she was talking to her ex from high school. He filed for a divorce and my mom moved out of the house. During that time, my dad tried his best to turn me against my mother, and he might have succeeded if he hadn't turned into a raging alcoholic by then. Honestly, I couldn't even blame my mom entirely for doing what she did, because even at 12, I could tell that my dad was messing everything up. We already had been unhappy, but he started adding to that unhappiness by coming home drunk every evening. He had already taken up day drinking on the weekend, and every time that he would drink, he would turn into this cursing raging monster of a guy who was just horrible to be around. So it was no surprise that my mom ended up cheating on him. I'm not defending her decision, but I'm just saying that both of my parents were incredibly flawed, which is why I tried to stay out of it as much as I could during the divorce. My mom also tried manipulating me against my dad, but since she couldn't meet me at home, she would ask me to meet her for lunch on the weekends, but instead of trying to ask me about my life and how I was dealing with everything, she would only talk about how awful my father was and how she needed me to make sure that if it came down to it, I would testify against him in family court. At the time, they were going through a lot of trouble with alimony and my custody, so they were trying to prepare me beforehand. Anyway, I ended up confiding in my grandparents about this after a few weeks after tolerating this from both my parents, and that's when they decided to step in. My dad's parents spoke to my mom's parents about what was going on, and all four of them got together, confronted their respective children, and informed them that until the divorce was over, and my custody arrangements were finalized, I would be staying with my paternal grandparents. That was the more convenient option since their home is closer to my school as well. My parents were not happy with this decision initially, and they claimed that since I was their child, I would be staying with them, but I put my foot down, and thankfully, I guess they didn't want more drama for me as well, so they let me stay with my grandparents until the divorce and all the other stuff was finalized. It took almost a year, maybe even more, but anyway, by the end of it, it was decided that my parents would have shared custody, but only after my dad cut down on his drinking. My mom did end up getting alimony, not as much as she would have liked, but at least she got something. During the divorce, my dad had already started to try and bring his alcoholism under control, so within a couple of months, I started splitting my time between my parents. I would spend 2 weeks with my dad, and the rest of the month with my mom. Even then, all they would do was badmouth each other, and they hardly ever seemed to care about me, so I found it very amusing that they had gotten divorced, but even now, they did not care about me, and I was still trying to be less of a problem in their lives. Anyway, By then, I was pretty much just used to trying to make myself invisible whenever I was around my parents. So I stuck doing that, and I didn't want to trouble my grandparents, so I didn't tell them about this either. For almost 3 years, this is how it was, and if, during that time, my parents had tried to see anyone else, I didn't know about it. I knew that my mom's affair with her high school ex had ended as soon as my dad found out about the affair, and she still maintains that it was just a fling because she was really lonely and upset about everything. And then, last year, my parents started speaking to each other again out of the blue. I don't know how it happened or what exactly changed, but one day, I just found out from my mother that she and my father were on speaking terms again, and she actually seemed happy about it. But honestly, I have become really detached from my parents, so I couldn't bring myself to care about what they were up to. Even when they sat me down and told me that they were thinking of giving their marriage a second chance, I didn't have anything to say to them. And then, last month, after dating for a while, my dad decided to ask my mom to marry him once again, and she said yes. Good for them. I was happy for them until they asked me to cover the expenses of the wedding from my education fund. That was where I drew the line, because that's something that my great uncle had left for me, not for them. My parents hadn't even had a proper relationship with him, even though he was my dad's uncle, and apparently, my dad and he had been very close when my father was younger. But he forgot about these things as he grew up, and I ended up becoming closer to my great uncle because while I was staying with my grandparents, he used to visit his sister quite often, and he really took a liking to me. He never had any family of his own, since he had never been married, and so, he ended up leaving a ton of money to me, and everything else he gave away to charity. I was very surprised too when I learned that he had left an education fund for me, but I was very grateful to him, and I was not going to let my parents waste all that money on their wedding. And that's when the guilt tripping started, because as soon as I said that I was not going to be using my education fund money to cover their wedding next year, they started talking about how much they had sacrificed for me, and I wasn't even willing to do this one little thing for them. By everything that they had done for me, my mother was referring to the fact that she had given up her career to raise me by staying at home all day, and my dad was referring to the fact that he had never stopped working after graduation and not even taking a break, just so that I could have the life that I wanted. I thought it was really unfair of them to bring things like that up, because it's not like I had asked them to do any of this for me. I was literally just a baby. These have been their own personal choices, and I can think of plenty of people who did not give up their careers or who did not end up working day and night for their children, even though they had kids around the same time as my parents did. They could have made different choices. It was all up to them, but now, they are blaming it on me as if I had asked them to do it. And when I tried to bring it up in my defense, they started accusing me of being ungrateful and told me that I had become very selfish. They even called me materialistic, even though never in my life have I ever asked them to spend more money on me than I required. I could have been a brat, but I guess from my earlier paragraphs, you guys can tell that I tried to stay out of my parents' way as much as I could, and that included financially. Because even though at one point, they reached a place of financial stability, I still remembered how much they used to fight about money when I was younger, and that stayed with me. So I knew better than to bother them for more money, even when they were doing well. And they should know better than to ask me, their teen son, to pay for their wedding. So the past couple of days have been really frustrating for me to deal with, and after a really big fight 2 days back, I thought that they had dropped it because they didn't speak about it again. But then I realized that I was wrong when they brought this up in front of the entire family at dinner last night. It was my grandpa's birthday, so he had invited everyone over for dinner, and during dessert, my parents started talking about the wedding, and somehow, they brought this up in the conversation very casually. They slipped in the fact that I was not ready to contribute to their wedding, in spite of having received a significant inheritance, even though my parents had done so much for me, and started talking about how ungrateful the current generation was. I found that really embarrassing because this was not something that I wanted out in front of the entire family, but they had already said it. I guess they were expecting everyone to come to their defense and lecture me about how selfish I was, but the table turned pretty quickly, and as soon as they brought it up, my grandparents started scolding them right in front of the family. They seemed very upset that my parents had even dared to ask me to contribute to their wedding, given the fact that they were grown adults, and now, even my mom had a job. She had been working ever since the divorce came through because she obviously couldn't survive on the alimony alone. Now, they didn't even have the excuse that only one of them worked, so they couldn't afford it. And even if they couldn't afford it, they still had no reason to ask me for help. They could have a small and private wedding and be done with it, because anyway, this was the second time that they were getting married. They didn't need to have to make a whole thing out of it once again, which is also why my grandparents were not paying for it either. I figured that that was why my parents had approached me, because my grandparents had already rejected them. After my grandparents started to scold them, my parents got defensive instead of just letting it go, and said that it wasn't even like they were asking me to spend my entire education fund on their wedding, They just wanted a tiny bit of it because it seemed fair to expect some things out of their only child after everything that our family had been through. And they even went to the extent of saying that it was shocking that I hadn't offered to cover the expenses myself, and they had to ask me because if I was a decent son, I wouldn't have waited to be asked in the first place, knowing that I had come into so much money recently. From the looks of everybody else in the room, I could tell that nobody else agreed with my parents, but they seemed pretty unfazed by that and decided to stick to their point. And that upset my grandparents even more, so they ended up arguing with my parents some more, and within a few minutes, it had turned into a full-blown fight. My parents were unnecessarily aggressive, and after a couple of minutes, the rest of the family also started telling them to calm down, and they didn't seem to like that. They were very offended, and they started to leave. They actually expected me to come along with them, even though I wanted to spend time with my grandparents instead. So I told them that they could leave if they wanted to, but I was going to come back home by myself when I wanted to. They looked outraged when I sent that, but, thankfully, they did not drag it out with me and just left quietly. After they left, I decided to talk to my grandparents privately, and I told them that I wanted to move in with them. Growing up with my parents has been difficult enough. I don't want to do it anymore because I was sick and exhausted from dealing with them. And they had just witnessed firsthand how unreasonable and selfish they could possibly be. I don't even need to explain to them why I did not want to stay with my parents anymore. My grandparents agreed immediately and told me that I could move in the same week, and their doors were always open to me. So after it was decided, I went back home happily, but as soon as I got back home, I was confronted by my parents, who were apparently very upset that I had nothing to say, while they were being attacked by the rest of the family. They were furious that I hadn't bothered to speak up in their favor and clear their names when my grandparents and the rest of the family were acting as if they were the bad guys there because they had asked me to contribute to the wedding expenses. I told them very clearly that I did not clear their names because I did not think they had earned it. I agreed with my grandparents and the rest of the family, and I couldn't help that they were right. That made them even more upset, and they started yelling at me, calling me all sorts of names and even cursing at me. I was about to let it go because I knew that in a couple of days, I would be moving out so I could stay with my grandparents anyway. But then, my mom declared that if I couldn't even pretend to be a happy family with them and be respectful of them and their sacrifices for me, then I had no business staying with them, and she asked me to leave immediately. I guess she thought that I would crawl back to them and start apologizing because I wouldn't have anywhere else to go, but she didn't know the conversation that I had had with my grandparents already. I was really angry, but I did not want to give them the satisfaction of getting a reaction out of me, so I just shrugged, went up to my room and packed a couple of my things, and then walked out without looking back. Since then, I have been staying with my grandparents, and they have been more than welcoming. But after my parents found out that I moved in with my grandparents, they have been sending us countless messages about how betrayed they feel. All their messages to my grandparents have basically been about how this is unfair and that since I am their child, I should come back to them, and my grandparents shouldn't be encouraging me to run away from home over petty things. I don't understand how this counts as running away because I'm almost an adult. I think I am capable enough of choosing who I want to live with. As for running away over petty things, I don't think that's the case at all. I think I just left because they were unbearable to live with, and I had put up with them for as long as I could, but honestly, I can't anymore. All their messages to me have just been about how excited they were to celebrate their reunion and second marriage with their son in their life again, so we could all have a fresh start. But now, I've broken their hearts by leaving them, and they feel let down by me. It's just really very melodramatic, and initially, I was not planning on replying, but then, my mom sent me a message last evening saying that she was very disappointed in my behavior and she couldn't believe that I was choosing to push them away. The way she made it sound like it was a choice that I had made and not something that they had forced me to do really did not sit right with me, so I told her that this was not my fault. She and my father had never been good parents to me, and now, they deserve this. All they had ever cared about was themselves, so they had no right to expect me to come back to them anytime soon. Besides, they were only mad at me because this looked bad for them. They did not actually care about me. Even before that, the only reason they had started fighting with me and actually talking to me was because I had come into a lot of money and they wanted me to use that for their wedding. Otherwise, they wouldn't even have cared about me, and that was the harsh truth. Then, I blocked her, but later, my dad texted me from a burner phone, saying that the things I had said were incredibly hurtful and that my mother hadn't stopped crying ever since I left. He also hasn't been feeling too good, but if I can't see that, then maybe I'm the one who is too self-involved to care about anybody else and not them. So am I the a-hole for telling my parents that they have never cared for me after leaving home? Update 1. Hey, thank you so much for all the comments. I've thought about it and I honestly don't feel bad about what I did. How can I? After so many years, I'm finally away from them and I'm really happy about it. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't feel bad about this. It has been a week since I left home and I really just feel free. I blocked my parents after that message that my father sent because I really didn't have anything to say to them, and I don't think that I need to know anything that they had to say to me. It's not like they are sorry about anything, they're not apologizing to me, so I don't need to feel bad for them. Even the last couple of messages that they had sent me were because they just wanted me to come back so they could save face in front of the rest of the family. They didn't want to be known as the kind of parents who were so bad that their only son chose to live away from them. But well, it's the truth, and I think everybody in the family is already aware of that. Coming to that, a lot of people had a bunch of questions about why nobody fought for my custody when they knew that my parents were neglecting me emotionally. It's just not that easy, and even though my grandparents wanted to get custody, they knew that my parents would never have let me go, and it would have just unnecessarily complicated the situation as well. I've talked to them about this, and I know that what they did was the right, or at least the more sensible thing to do, so I'm not holding that against anyone. As for my grandparents, they have still been receiving messages and emails from my parents, but they have stopped reading them because they know that they're all about me, and my parents are basically just upset that my grandparents are encouraging me to stay away from my parents. They think that this is bad behavior, and grandparents are rewarding it as if I'm a dog and not a human being who is fully aware of what he's doing. My grandparents haven't blocked my parents because they think it's a little too extreme, and they would still want to be contacted if there was an emergency, and I can understand where that's coming from. But my mom's parents are not that nice. They have blocked her and have even told her that they don't want to speak to her until I forgive her. They even said that they are not going to be attending the wedding, so that's pretty sad for my mom, but anyway, you reap what you sow. Update 2. Hey, so it's been 3 months since I left home, and a couple of weeks after my last update, my parents stopped trying to text my grandparents as well. So for the past few months, things have been quite peaceful, and I've gotten used to my new life. I'm much happier now since I'm living with my grandparents, and they actually seem to care about me and take an interest in my life. But then, a few days back, my parents showed up, and when I came back home from school, they were just there, waiting for me. As soon as they saw me, they hugged me without even saying anything and started crying. I was a little shocked, so I couldn't say anything. Anyway, after they took their seats again, my grandparents told me that they had arrived just a couple of minutes before I came back home, and apparently, they were here to take me back with them because now, several weeks had passed since our fight, and they thought it was about time that we put everything behind us. I told them that I was not ready to go back home with them and that they were just wasting their time here. They looked upset, but they still tried to reason with me, saying that they were my parents after all, and I couldn't stay mad at them forever. So I really had to explain to them that I wasn't even mad at them anymore, I just didn't want to stay with them because I was happier with my grandparents. We argued about that for a couple of minutes, but then, I just told them that they could say whatever they wanted to, but my decision was final. My dad said that they would get a lawyer involved and bring me back home, and he sounded pretty angry, so my grandparents decided to intervene and reminded him that I was almost 18. In a couple of months, I would be an adult, and there was no way that they could force me to come back home, and I didn't want to. So my dad started yelling at his dad, and once again, this whole interaction ended in a fight. After a point, my grandparents literally had to physically push my parents out of the house because they just refused to let it go. It was sad because even after so many weeks have passed, they still don't get it. They didn't even apologize to me even once while they were here, and I tried not to think about it after it was over, but I just couldn't stop. So I decided to share it here because I just had to get it off my chest somehow. It wasn't very nice, but well, that's just how my parents are. I don't even know why they bothered to show up to bring me back home with them when deep down, they knew that they were not sorry about anything, and as soon as I could go back home with them, they would go back to treating me badly and neglecting me. Honestly, I just hope that they learn a lesson after this and leave us alone because I'm sick of this. I don't want any more drama from them, and I just want them to stay away. I don't understand why it's so difficult for them to do because it's not like the app is particularly attached to me. Anyway, I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Hopefully, this is the last time that we end up fighting over this because this is all very emotionally exhausting. Not just for myself, but also for my grandparents, because every time stuff like this happens, I feel guilty for putting them through this along with me too. Update 3. Hey, so my parents got married last week. It came as a bit of a surprise to everybody because from what we knew, they had been planning on getting married sometime during the middle of next year. But it's only been 6 months since my last update, and they decided to go through with it. Not a lot of people from the family were invited, just a couple of their close friends and a few distant family members. The wedding was relatively small, and I guess they decided to make the best of the situation and didn't have a huge wedding. No prizes for guessing that obviously my grandparents and I were not invited. We didn't even find out until they posted the photos on social media and a couple of people sent it to us. I wish them all the best, honestly, and I'm actually really happy that they found their way to each other because this means that other people will be spared. Jokes aside, I really do hope that they are happier this time around. Even if they aren't, at least I will have the satisfaction of knowing that I was never the problem. Update 4. So, it's been a year since my parents got married again and they haven't been in touch with me. I couldn't be more grateful about it because my life has improved significantly. I celebrated my 18th birthday a couple of months ago and I've been in college for a while now. I live on campus, so I kind of miss my grandparents, but I try to make it a point to visit them on alternate weekends. My parents did reach out to me when they learned that I was moving away, but it wasn't to congratulate me or anything. That would have been way too nice for them, so they just sent me an email saying that they had heard that I was moving away for college and told me that after I graduated, I should not expect them to let me back in anymore and that they were officially done with me since I had turned 18. Weird that they even thought that I would approach them to help me out after graduation. I didn't want anything to do with them either. Anyway, I just ignored that and moved on with my life. I'm doing better now and I'm happy with my life.